Hey, welcome back to Marriage is Not the End. When I first read today's story, my immediate thought was, asterisk, how could a man be this cunning, and how could a woman be this naive? Asterisk, but by the time I reached the last page, I realized I was wrong. That man wasn't cunning. He was a seed buried in the ground for 10 years, waiting for the one woman who might finally look down and notice him. And that woman wasn't naive. She saw through every calculation, and still chose to step into the trap. Because she knew that at the bottom of it lay 10 years of his sincerity. This story was sent in by one of our listeners. To protect their privacy, I've changed the names and locations. Our heroine is Emily Chen, who lives on the Upper East Side of New York. Our hero is Alexander Thompson. On Wall Street they call him Iceblade, because his gaze can freeze even the hottest takeover bid. Their story begins with a wedding dress. Emily was trying on her 7th wedding dress when she got the call from Thompson Group's legal department. Yes, you heard that right, the 7th one. Not because she was picky. Because she had absolutely no desire to get married. The lights in the bridal boutique were painfully bright enough that even layers of foundation couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. She clutched her phone while a cold, professional male voice on the other end read out a supplemental clause. Should Chen Building Materials declare bankruptcy, Ms. Chen will automatically forfeit all jointly held marital assets. Emily said nothing. But her fingers tightened around the phone until her knuckles turned white. 3 days earlier, her father, Old Chen, had suffered a cerebral hemorrhage in his office and was rushed straight into the ICU at New York Presbyterian Hospital. He had spent his entire life building a construction materials supply business, from a small warehouse in Queens to supplying half the renovation market in Manhattan. But one failed project had snapped the company's cash flow, and now the bank's loan notices were piling up higher than the filing cabinets in his office. Emily was his only child. She had just graduated from Yale with an MBA and hadn't even had time to join the family business before being handed this disaster. And Alexander Thompson, the capital hunter who had tripled the market value of Thompson Group before turning 30, was the only person in New York who could save her. Their blind date didn't happen in a cafe or a Michelin-starred restaurant. It happened in the top-floor conference room of Thompson Group. Emily wore the most formal black suit she could find in her closet and sat at one end of a conference table that could seat 20 people. He sat at the other end, flipping through the agreement in front of him without even looking up. The essence of a business marriage is resource exchange, he said, as if reading a quarterly report. I need a married status to stabilize the stock price. You need capital to plug your financial hole. 1 year. Then we separate peacefully. 8-figure compensation. You can sign now, the check clears tomorrow. Emily stared at the top of his head. His hair was cut short, the line at the back of his neck sharp and precise. His white shirt collar was buttoned flawlessly. And suddenly she remembered 8 years earlier, in a lecture hall at Cornell, when she had crossed the entire auditorium just to slip a love letter into his hand. He had glanced at the signature and handed it back. Sorry, he'd said. I don't date the daughter of a competitor. At the time, Thompson Group and Chen Building Materials had been bidding on the same government contract. He was a senior. She had just been accepted to Yale. Now he sat across from her, and didn't remember her at all. Why me? She heard herself ask. His pen paused. For the first time, he looked up. His eyes were gray-blue, like something submerged in icy water, clean, emotionless. Because you're the cleanest option, he said. No scandals. No ambition. Father critically ill. Company on the brink. Easy to control. Emily dug her nails into her palm. She didn't tell him that she'd spent 3 nights writing that love letter, rewriting it 5 times on perfumed stationery. She didn't tell him that after he rejected her, she'd cried for an entire afternoon on the top floor of the library, shredding that letter into pieces. Instead, she held out her hand. I agree. But I want one clause added. During the marriage, Thompson Group will not target Chen Building Materials clients. He took her hand. His palm was dry and warm, his grip strong enough that the bones in her fingers ached. Deal. The wedding took place in a small private church in Westchester, the kind of little stone building you drive past without giving a second glance. At 5 in the morning, her best friend Maggie helped her put on the veil while fuming. That jerk even made you pick out your own engagement ring. He literally said, as long as it fits, it's just a prop anyway. Maggie, Emily said quietly, pressing her hand over hers, help me touch up my lipstick. She needed the red, to hide the gray exhaustion of a sleepless night. Alexander was waiting for her at the church entrance. Black suit. White rose boutonniere. With that face, he looked like he'd stepped straight off the cover of a magazine. When he took her arm, Emily caught the scent of cedar and mint. Exactly the same scent she remembered from the hallway years ago after one of his speeches. "Smile," he murmured. The camera shutters erupted like waves. Emily lifted the practiced curve of her lips. When she said "I do" before the priest, her voice was so steady it surprised even herself. During the ring exchange, he held her left hand firmly. The ring slid down her finger with a decisive, almost rough motion. Metal scraped over her knuckle and she flinched slightly from the pain. "Endure it," he said through a perfect smile, his breath brushing her ear. "The press is watching." The reception had only 8 tables. When an elder jokingly asked when they planned to have children, Alexander's hand suddenly tightened at her waist, wrinkling the fabric of her dress. He smiled politely. "Whenever it happens." But the smile never reached his eyes. After the reception, Emily was vomiting violently in the restroom. Maggie rubbed her back. "Want to run away? My car's parked by the side entrance, and who pays my dad's hospital bills if I do?" Emily splashed cold water on her face. "I'll be fine. It's just 1 year." She fixed her makeup and walked out. Alexander was leaning at the end of the hallway, smoking. When he saw her, he stubbed the cigarette out. "Let's go, Miss Chen," he said. "To our new home." Miss Chen. On the first day of their marriage, that's what he called her. The Thompson family estate was in Greenwich, Connecticut, a 3-story French-style villa surrounded by a garden full of hydrangeas. Emily paused when she stepped out of the car. Her mother had loved hydrangeas more than anything. You couldn't even buy them in most New York flower shops. You had to order them from specialty nurseries on Long Island. "The previous owner planted them," Alexander said, setting her suitcase by the stairs. "I didn't bother replacing them." "Your bedroom's at the end of the hallway. Mine's opposite. Separate staircases. We avoid running into each other. Shared areas on staggered schedules. Basic courtesy." Emily nodded. "Understood, Alexander." He frowned slightly, but said nothing. At 2 in the morning, Emily woke up thirsty. She went downstairs to the kitchen, but as she passed the study she saw light spilling under the door. Inside, his voice carried from an international conference call: "Postpone the Southeast Asia acquisition." "No, it's not a divorce, it's a marriage. Don't worry, it won't affect the group's interests. It's just a performance." She set the glass back on the counter without drinking and quietly returned to her room. On the 3rd day of their marriage, his assistant delivered a document titled Marital Conduct Guidelines. Heavy paper with gold edges. The clauses were printed with meticulous precision. Attend public events together every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday at 7 p.m. for no less than 2 hours. Interact on social media at least 3 times per week. No public displays of marital discord. If either party develops genuine emotional attachment, it must be disclosed immediately and termination of the agreement negotiated. She stared at the last line for a long time. She picked up a pen, drew a line under the words genuine emotional attachment, then crossed it out. That night they had dinner at a 3-star Michelin restaurant. He sat across from her cutting his steak. Emily watched the hand holding the knife, defined knuckles, veins faintly visible beneath pale skin. "Finished staring?" he asked without looking up. "Alexander is good-looking. No harm in appreciating the view." The knife paused for a second. He finally looked up. "Not bad acting," he said. "But next time you say something like that, try not to let your ears turn red." Emily instinctively touched her earlobe. It was burning hot. On the drive back to Greenwich, she called his name for the first time. "Alexander, why did you agree to this marriage? With your status, you don't need marriage to stabilize your stock price." Silence filled the car for a long time. "Because I needed someone who would absolutely never fall in love with me," he said softly. "And you, Emily, your eyes are very clean. Clean enough to be reassuring." The car stopped at the estate gates. He got out first and walked straight into the night. Emily touched the diamond ring on her ring finger and smiled. Reassuring? He'd felt reassured far too soon. She was indeed clean, so clean that even her resentment was carefully hidden. But she had forgotten to tell him one thing. That love letter years ago might have been rejected, but when she wrote it, she meant every word. During the first week of their marriage, Emily never stepped into his study. The door was always locked. Sometimes, late at night, she could hear the faint sound of a keyboard through it. Until Friday afternoon. She came home early after finishing a meeting with a supplier and noticed the study door slightly ajar. His car wasn't in the garage. Emily told herself she should walk away. But her feet refused to move. She pushed the door open gently. And froze. The walls weren't covered with photos. They were covered with data. 5 years of financial analysis on Chin building materials plastered across an entire wall, annotated in dense red and blue ink. Cash flow charts. Client loss rates. Changes in bank loan interest rates. It was more detailed than anything she, the heir to the company, had ever compiled herself. On the desk lay a document titled Risk Assessment Report, Chen Building Materials. It was dated 3 months earlier, before her father collapsed, before she had approached him about the marriage. On the last page, a handwritten line read, recommended acquisition timing, after Qin Zhengwo falls ill, when Emily is isolated and helpless. The handwriting was his. Footsteps sounded behind her. Emily turned around and raised the report. Is my own house off limits to me? He stood in the doorway, his suit jacket draped over his arm, his tie loosened. He looked at her, not with guilt, but with the irritation of someone whose privacy had been violated. Put it down. You planned this from the beginning, Emily said, her voice shaking. You investigated my family. You waited for my father to get sick. You waited until I had nowhere left to turn. This marriage isn't a resource exchange, it's just another step in your plan to swallow Chen Building Materials. And if it is? He stepped forward, his shadow falling over her. Emily, there are no saviors in the business world. Your father expanded using heavy leverage, alienated major clients, and the banks have been waiting to pull his loans. Without me, Chen Building Materials would be liquidated next month. Then why did you sign that additional clause? Emily cut him off. If my company goes bankrupt, I automatically forfeit any marital assets. That clause protects me. He froze. This report recommends an acquisition, Emily continued, pointing to the data on the wall. But you didn't execute it. Instead, you chose a marriage alliance. You gave me an 8-figure compensation package and added that clause to protect me. Why? Silence hardened the air between them. His Adam's apple shifted. He reached for the report. Emily stepped back until the desk pressed into her lower back. There was nowhere left to retreat. Because, he grabbed her wrist, his grip painfully tight, yet his gaze flickered away. Because acquisitions are troublesome. Marriage is simpler. Lower cost. Liar. Emily looked up at him. They were close enough that she could count his eyelashes. His breathing had grown uneven. His grip on her wrist loosened, then tightened again. Get out, he finally said, his voice hoarse. Now. Emily didn't move. She watched the faint flush creeping up the tips of his ears. Watched the tension along his jaw. Alexander, she said quietly, are you? Get out. He shoved her out of the study and slammed the door in her face. Emily stood in the hallway, rubbing her burning wrist. The look in his eyes just now hadn't been the look of a hunter staring at prey. It had been the look of a drowning man staring at driftwood. She turned and walked back toward her room. Passing through the living room, she noticed a small medicine box on the coffee table. Stomach medicine. Her usual brand. A sticky note was tucked beneath it, take after meals. The handwriting was messy. His. Emily opened the box and found a piece of candy tucked inside. Orange flavored. She unwrapped it and put it in her mouth. The sweetness dissolved on her tongue, and suddenly tears flooded her eyes. She remembered sophomore year in college. She had been studying late in the library when her stomach started hurting so badly she couldn't sit upright. Someone had placed a candy beside her hand. When she looked up, she only saw a retreating back, a white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows. So it hadn't been coincidence. He had remembered. The hidden debts of Chen Building Materials were far worse than Emily had imagined. Inside the safe in her father's study, she found a loan contract. 3 years earlier, to secure a plot of land in Brooklyn, her father had borrowed money from an underground lender. The interest had compounded endlessly. Now the principal plus interest had surpassed $10 million. The guarantor's signature belonged to her uncle. Your uncle ran already, Maggie said over the phone. I checked, he left for Singapore last month and transferred all his assets out. Emily, if this loan gets exposed, your father could be charged with illegal fundraising. There was only one way to deal with it. Attend the dinner. The real creditor behind the loan shark operation was a newly rich businessman who'd built his empire in gray market industries, Marcus Joe. He specifically demanded to negotiate with Emily in person. The meeting place, a private club on Long Island. It was Thursday, the day she and Alexander were supposed to attend a public event together. Emily lied and said her father's condition had worsened, canceling the dinner appearance. The club lighting was dim. Marcus sat at the head of the table. Miss Chen, he said, your father borrowed money from us. Principal plus interest comes to $12 million. Out of respect for Thompson, I'll wipe the interest. $10 million. Cash. 3 days. Marcus, Emily said, leaving the wine untouched, this loan is illegal. Any annual interest above 36% isn't legally enforceable. If you take this to court, you'd only recover the principal plus reasonable interest, about 8 million. Marcus laughed and reached out, pinching her chin. Does Thompson know you're this spicy? I thought he married a little white rabbit. By the third glass of wine, Emily rushed into the restroom and vomited violently. The woman in the mirror looked wrecked, eyeliner smeared, lipstick streaked across her chin. She splashed cold water on her face. Outside, she heard Marcus making a phone call. Yeah, Thompson's wife. Came alone. Don't worry, Thompson won't interfere. Their marriage is fake anyway. When the door opened, Emily thought it was Marcus's men. Instead, it was Alexander. He wore a dark gray coat, rainwater still clinging to his shoulders. His eyes were colder than the winter night outside. He glanced at her disheveled state, took off his coat, and wrapped it around her. The movement was rough but careful, avoiding pressure on her stomach. Can you walk? He asked. Emily nodded, then shook her head. The alcohol tangled her tongue. How did you? Maggie called me. He pulled her up, steadying her. She said you were lying. Apparently every time you lie, you unconsciously touch your wedding ring. Emily lowered her gaze. The diamond on her finger had been rubbed bright. He guided her toward the exit. Marcus stepped into their path, his face darkening. Thompson. This is between me and Miss Chen. Between you and her? Alexander smiled. The smile made Emily shiver. Marcus, remember that land you tried to bid for last month? The government zoning plan came out today. It's being turned into a sewage treatment plant. All the liquidity you put on that bid will turn into negative assets next week. Marcus's face turned pale. You, and one more thing, Alexander said softly. The hand you used to touch her earlier? Starting tomorrow, you might want to see a doctor. I had someone add a little something to your drink. Not lethal. Just painful. The car heater was blasting. Emily curled up in the passenger seat, her stomach twisting like a knife inside her. You already knew, she said hoarsely. That debt. Marcus. You knew everything. I did. Then why didn't you tell me? Tell you what? He glanced at her, his eyes dark. That your father is a gambler? That your uncle sold you out long ago? Or should I tell you? He stopped, swallowing. That if you had just asked me, I would have solved it for you? Emily stared at him. He looked back at the road, his voice dropping lower. Emily, I was waiting for you to say it. Waiting for you to say, Alexander, please help me. He gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Instead of going to a place like that, drinking that kind of wine, and letting men like that, he couldn't finish the sentence. Emily touched the diamond ring on her finger and smiled. Reassuring? He'd relaxed far too soon. She really was clean, so clean that even her resentment was hidden with care. But she had forgotten to tell him one thing. That the love letter she wrote all those years ago might have been rejected, but when she wrote it, she had meant every word. During the first week of their marriage, Emily never entered his study. The door was always locked. Occasionally, late at night, the faint tapping of a keyboard could be heard from inside. Until Friday afternoon. She finished a meeting with a supplier early and came home to find the study door slightly ajar. His car wasn't in the garage. Emily told herself she should walk away, but her feet refused to move. She gently pushed the door open. And froze. The walls weren't covered with photographs. They were covered with data. 5 years of financial analysis of Chen building materials filled the entire wall, annotated in dense red and blue ink. Cash flow charts, client loss rates, shifts in bank loan interest rates, everything was more detailed than what she, the company's heir, had compiled herself. On the desk lay a report titled Risk Assessment Report, Chen Building Materials. The date at the bottom was 3 months ago. Before her father collapsed, before she ever approached him about a marriage alliance. On the last page was a handwritten note, recommended acquisition timing, after Qin Jiangwo falls ill, when Emily is isolated and helpless. The handwriting was his. Footsteps sounded behind her. Emily turned and held up the report. Am I not allowed into my own house? He stood in the doorway, suit jacket draped over his arm, tie loosened. He looked at her, not with guilt, but with the irritation of someone whose territory had been invaded. Put it down. You planned this from the beginning, Emily said, her voice trembling. You investigated my family, waited for my father to fall ill, waited until I had nowhere left to turn. This marriage isn't a resource exchange, it's one step in your plan to swallow Chen building materials. And if it is? He stepped forward, his shadow falling over her. Emily, there are no saviors in business. Your father expanded with high leverage, alienated major clients, and the banks have been eager to call their loans. Without me, Chen building materials would be in liquidation next month. Then why did you sign that clause? Emily interrupted. If my company goes bankrupt, I automatically forfeit my marital property claim. That clause protects me. He froze. This report recommends an acquisition, she continued, pointing at the wall. But you never executed it. Instead, you chose a marriage alliance, gave me an 8-figure settlement, added a clause to protect me, and now you're helping with my debt. Why? Silence thickened in the room. His throat moved. He reached for the report. Emily stepped back until the edge of the desk pressed against her waist. Because, he grabbed her wrist, gripping hard enough to hurt, yet his gaze flickered away. Because an acquisition is complicated. Marriage is simpler. Lower cost. Liar. Emily tilted her head up. They were close enough that she could count his eyelashes. His breathing had grown uneven. Get out, he finally said, his voice rough. Now. Emily didn't move. She watched the tips of his ears redden. Watched the tension in his jaw. Alexander, she said quietly, are you? Get out. He pushed her out of the study and slammed the door. Emily stood in the hallway, rubbing her aching wrist. The look in his eyes hadn't been a predator staring at prey. It had been a drowning man staring at driftwood. She turned back toward her room. Passing the living room, she noticed a small medicine box on the coffee table. Stomach medicine, her usual brand. A sticky note was tucked beneath it, take after meals. The handwriting was messy. His. Emily opened the box and found a piece of candy tucked inside. Orange flavored. She unwrapped it and placed it on her tongue. The sweetness spread across her mouth, and suddenly tears welled up. She remembered sophomore year, studying late in the library until her stomach hurt so badly she couldn't sit up. Someone had left a piece of candy beside her hand. When she looked up, she only saw a figure walking away, a white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows. So it hadn't been coincidence. He had remembered. The hidden debt of Chin Building Materials was worse than Emily expected. Inside the safe in her father's study, she found a loan contract. 3 years ago, to secure a plot of land in Brooklyn, her father had borrowed money from an underground lender. The interest had compounded until now the total exceeded $10 million. The guarantor's signature belonged to her uncle. Your uncle ran already, Maggie said over the phone. I checked, he left for Singapore last month and transferred all his assets out. Emily, if this loan gets exposed, your father could be charged with illegal fundraising. There was only one option left. Attend the dinner. The real creditor behind the loan sharks was a gray market tycoon named Marcus Joe. He demanded Emily negotiate with him personally at a private club on Long Island. That Thursday, she was supposed to attend a public event with Alexander. Instead, she lied and said her father's condition had worsened. The club lighting was dim. Marcus sat at the head of the table. Miss Chen, he said, your father's loan, principal and interest totals $12 million. Out of respect for Thompson, I'll erase the interest. $10 million. Cash. 3 days. Marcus, Emily said calmly, leaving the wine untouched, this is an illegal loan. Any interest above 36% annually isn't legally protected. If you take this to court, the most you'll recover is about $8 million. Marcus laughed and grabbed her chin. Does Thompson know you're this fierce? I thought he married a little white rabbit. By the third glass of wine, Emily rushed to the restroom and vomited violently. In the mirror her eyeliner was smeared, lipstick streaked across her chin. She splashed cold water on her face. Outside, Marcus's voice carried through the door as he made a call. Yeah, Thompson's wife. Came alone. Don't worry, Thompson won't interfere. Their marriage is fake anyway. When the door opened, Emily assumed it was Marcus's men. Instead, Alexander walked in. He wore a dark gray coat, rainwater on his shoulders. His eyes were colder than the winter night outside. He took one look at her, removed his coat, and wrapped it around her. The movement was rough but careful, avoiding pressure on her stomach. Can you walk? He asked. Emily nodded, then shook her head, her words slurring from alcohol. How did you? Maggie called me, he said, lifting her up. She said you were lying. Apparently when you lie, you unconsciously touch your wedding ring. Emily looked down. The diamond had been rubbed bright. He guided her toward the door. Marcus blocked the exit, his expression dark. Thompson, this is between me and Miss Chen. Between you and her? Alexander smiled. The smile made Emily shiver. Marcus, remember that land you tried to bid on last month? The government zoning plan came out today. It's being turned into a sewage treatment plant. All the liquidity you bet on that deal will become negative assets next week. Marcus's face went pale. You, and one more thing, Alexander said softly. The hand you used to touch her earlier? Tomorrow you might want to see a doctor. I had someone add something to your drink. Not lethal. Just painful. The heater in the car was running high. Emily curled in the passenger seat, her stomach twisting painfully. You already knew, she said hoarsely. About the debt. About Marcus. I did. Then why didn't you tell me? Tell you what? He glanced at her, his eyes dark. That your father is a gambler? That your uncle sold you out? Or that if you'd just asked me, he stopped, I would have solved everything for you? Emily stared at him. He looked back at the road. Emily, I was waiting for you to say it. Waiting for you to say, Alexander, please help me. His hands tightened around the steering wheel. Instead of going to a place like that, drinking that kind of wine, letting men like that, he couldn't finish the sentence. The car stopped outside the estate. He didn't turn off the engine. Hospital or home? Home, she said. Then added quietly, here. Our home. He was silent for so long that a thin layer of fog formed on the window. He wiped it away slowly. Emily, do you realize the words going home aren't something you say lightly? I know, she said. But I still want to say it. He finally drove the car into the garage. When he helped her upstairs, her legs were too weak to stand and she practically collapsed against him. His body stiffened for a moment before he lifted her into his arms. His heart was beating fast, so fast she could feel it through his coat. Emily buried her face in the hollow of his neck, smelling cedar, rain, and a faint trace of blood. She noticed his knuckles were split. Why did you fight? She asked. You usually prefer more business-like solutions. He set her on the bed and knelt to remove her heels. His fingers paused when they touched her ankle. A bruise circled it where Marcus's men had grabbed her. Because, he said quietly, head lowered into the shadows, when I saw him touch you, I wanted to kill him. Emily stopped breathing for a moment. He stood again, returning to his usual cold composure. Your medicine is by the bed. Water's in the thermos. My lawyer will handle the debt tomorrow. You don't need to worry about it anymore. He turned to leave. Emily grabbed his sleeve. That report in your study, the acquisition timing you wrote. Why didn't you execute it? His back stiffened. You planned everything 3 months ago, she continued. But you didn't do it. Instead you married me, gave me money, added a protective clause, and now you're fixing my debt. Emily, he interrupted, his voice rough, some questions shouldn't be asked. Then what should I ask, she said, letting go of his sleeve and taking his hand instead. Why you remember what medicine I take when my stomach hurts? Why you know I touch my ring when I lie? Or should I ask, she took a deep breath, was that candy in the library sophomore year, from you? He turned sharply. The calm, icy control in his expression shattered, revealing something raw and burning beneath. You, remember? I remember, Emily said. I remember the sleeves of your white shirt, the way you walked away. When I ran out after you, you were already gone. I looked for you for months until I saw your name in a financial magazine, your first acquisition. She smiled faintly. Alexander, you rejected my love letter saying you wouldn't date a competitor's daughter. But you'd already noticed me, in the library, the cafeteria, the business school hallway. You investigated me, didn't you? Just like now, memorizing everything about me. Silence flooded the room. He pulled his hand away, stepped back, and knocked over the bedside lamp. Glass shattered loudly. He didn't look at it. Instead he walked toward the door and stopped with his hand on the knob. Yes, he said quietly, still facing away. I investigated you. Starting the day you lent an umbrella to a bleeding stranger. Emily froze. That was junior year, he continued softly. I'd been attacked off campus, stabbed 3 times, and ran into a small church. You came out with a blue and white checkered umbrella and asked if I needed to call the police. Your eyes were bright. You weren't afraid, only worried. He turned back, eyes reddened. It took me 3 years to find out who you were. By then Thompson Group and Chin Building Materials were competing for a Brooklyn project. I wrote that rejection letter, locked your umbrella in a drawer, and told myself it was the best ending. But you came back later, Emily said softly. Through marriage. Because I couldn't wait anymore, he said with a bitter smile. When your father fell ill, I knew Marcus was targeting you. I knew your uncle planned to sell you to your creditors. I thought about acquiring Chin Building Materials outright and protecting you that way, but, he paused. I wanted more. I wanted the right to stand beside you, even if only temporarily. Emily climbed off the bed, barefoot, stepping on shards of glass without stopping. She walked up to him and looked into his eyes. Temporarily? The contract says 1 year, he said, avoiding her gaze. When it ends, you can leave. I'll give you, Alexander, she interrupted. I saw the note you penciled into page 7 of the prenup. His body went rigid. If either party falls in love, the contract converts to a lifetime agreement. She recited it calmly. Your handwriting. His face flushed, from the tips of his ears down his neck. That was just something I scribbled. I just happened to see it, she said softly. And happened to remember it. She rose on her toes and kissed him. A light touch, like a butterfly's wings. He froze, neither returning the kiss nor pulling away. I'm not casual, she said when she pulled back slightly. Alexander, I'm asking seriously. Does that note still count? Outside, rain began to fall again, heavy, just like the day behind the church years ago. He looked at her for a long time. Then he lifted his hand and cupped her face, wiping away a tear with his thumb. It counts. His voice was hoarse but steady. It always counts. He lowered his head and kissed her again, this time not gently. The kiss carried wine, blood, and 3 years of suppressed longing, like a storm finally breaking. Emily gripped his shirt and felt something warm fall onto the back of her hand. Not rain. His tears. This man who never showed weakness buried his face in her neck between breaths. Emily, you can't lie to me. If this is just gratitude, just being moved, just, I love you, she said. I have since sophomore year. Even after you rejected me. Even after you forgot who I was. Even if you married me for a deal. I still love you. Pathetic, right? He lifted his head, eyes red, but smiling. It was the first genuine smile she had ever seen from him. I'm pathetic too, he said softly. I never married you for a deal. I just wanted to keep you beside me. Even if I had to do it in the most shameless way. Their foreheads touched as rain hammered outside and broken glass glittered beneath their feet. And they shared their first real kiss. The news of his impeachment came from Maggie's phone call. Internal Thompson Group documents leaked. They say he shorted Chin building materials stock just to marry you, and that he diverted company funds to bail you out. The board is voting to remove him this afternoon. When Emily arrived at Thompson Tower, the board meeting had already begun. She was stopped outside the conference room. Mrs. Thompson, the secretary said nervously, without an appointment you can't enter. I'm the largest individual shareholder of Thompson Group, Emily said, pulling documents from her bag. I hold 15%. I'll be attending. Those were the shares he had voluntarily given up to her. She had never signed the transfer papers. Until now. She signed them in the car on the way over. The conference room doors opened. At the far end of the long table sat Alexander, white shirt, gray suit, tie perfectly straight. When he saw her, his expression finally flickered. Miss Chen, said the vice chairman presiding over the meeting, his uncle, Edward Lin, with a thin smile. This is an internal meeting. Mrs. Thompson ***. Emily corrected calmly as she walked to Alexander's side. Or, if you prefer, shareholder of Thompson Group. She placed the documents on the table. 15%. I'll be observing. The meeting continued. Edward began listing the charges. Misappropriation of funds, self-dealing, and putting the company's interests at risk for personal reasons. I have a question, Emily said. Every head turned toward her. When Edward says misappropriation of funds, Emily said as she opened her laptop and projected the screen onto the wall, is he referring to this $30 million transfer? She pulled up the bank records. The recipient was Chen Building Materials. But please, note the memo line, personal loan from Alexander Thompson, 8% annual interest, collateralized by 0.5% of Thompson Group shares. She looked at Edward. This was a lawful loan, not misappropriation. He used his own money to lend to his wife's family company, charged interest, and pledged his own shares as collateral. Edward, and you call that self-dealing? The room went silent. As for the accusation that he shorted Chin Building Materials stock, Emily continued, I checked the trading records from the past 6 months. The IP address for the short-selling account traces back to Singapore. She clicked open another document. And your son, Edward, moved to Singapore just last month. He also suddenly acquired 3 luxury homes there. Coincidence? Edward's face flushed a dark, ugly red. You're making baseless accusations. Whether I am or not is for the SEC to investigate, Emily said, closing her laptop. But before that, I'd like the board to see one more thing. She pulled a flash drive from her bag and inserted it into the computer. The screen lit up with surveillance footage. A private room at the club. Edward and Marcus shaking hands. Their voices came through clearly. Once Alexander is out, Chin Building Materials is yours. As for that girl, do whatever you want with her. This video, Emily said, was given to me by Marcus. According to him, Edward contacted him first and orchestrated the debt trap, forcing me to marry Alexander, then using that to bring him down. Edward, tell me, who exactly is the one harming the company's interests? The room exploded. When the votes were counted, Edward was suspended. Alexander stayed. As the meeting adjourned, The directors looked at Emily differently now. What had begun as condescension had turned to caution, and then into something close to respect. In the elevator, Alexander cornered her. "Where did you get the flash drive?" he asked, his voice low and rough. "Marcus gave it to me," she said. "I went to see him yesterday. I used the method you taught me. I told him that once Edward fell, his debt could be converted into equity, and he could become a minor shareholder in Thompson Group. He weighed his options and decided it was a good deal." His gaze darkened. "You went to see Marcus alone?" What were you wearing?" "A suit," she said. "The gray one you bought me. Very intimidating. Very professional." He lowered his head and kissed her. The elevator doors opened and closed again. Someone coughed awkwardly and stepped back out. Neither of them stopped. "Never again," he murmured between kisses. "You are never going to a place like that alone again." "Then you have to protect me," she said with a smile. "Always." "Always," he said. "I wrote it in the margin. It counts." A week after the crisis was over, he handed Emily a document. At first she thought it might be another love letter. He really had been writing them, one every day. But this packet was too thick to be a letter. On the cover, it read, "Divorce agreement, take a look," he said, sitting across from her, his expression calm. "In the property division section, I'm transferring everything I own to you, my Thompson Group shares, the real estate, my funds. I'm walking away with nothing." "Why?" "Because I breached the contract," he said. Article 7 of the prenup. If either party falls in love, the agreement automatically converts into a lifetime contract. But now I realize, that kind of lifetime arrangement wouldn't be fair to you. He adjusted his glasses, a small habit he had whenever he was nervous. "I looked into it. Chen Building Materials debts have been cleared. Your father is stable. You now hold 15% of Thompson Group, enough to make sure you never have to worry for the rest of your life. You don't need me anymore, Emily. You deserve the freedom to choose, not to be bound by something I scribbled in a margin." Emily looked down at the agreement and turned to the final page. Beside the signature line, he had written, "As you wish. Alex ***, what does that mean?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It means," he said as he rose and walked to the window, turning his back to her, "I'm letting you go. You can sign the agreement, take everything I have, and start over. No schemes. No contracts. No, me." He paused, his shoulders taut. "Or you can tear it up. But if you do, that means tying yourself to a man with stains all over him. I investigated you, manipulated you, took advantage of your desperation. None of that disappears. It will always be there. Every time you look at me, it will remind you that from the very beginning, I was never pure." Emily stared at his back. Sunlight streamed through the window, outlining him in gold, but it did nothing to soften the loneliness around him. She picked up the agreement and slowly tore it in half. He turned around. Shock flashed across his face, then hope, then an almost disbelieving vulnerability. "You, Alexander," Emily said, dropping the torn pages into the trash, "you've written me 7 love letters, and not one of them mentions this." "Mentions what?" "The first time you saw me wasn't in that lecture hall sophomore year," she said. "It was at the freshman welcome recital. I was wearing a white dress, playing piano on stage, and I hit 3 wrong notes. Afterward I hid backstage and cried. Someone handed me a piece of orange candy and walked away without saying a word." His expression changed. "It was the same kind of candy as the one in the library," Emily said. "I looked for that person afterward and never found him. Until last month, when I found a freshman recital program in the drawer of your study. On the back, you'd written, Emily Chen. Piano. Played terribly, cried even worse, but her eyes were bright. September 10, 2013. She walked toward him, each step landing in a patch of sunlight. "You noticed me earlier than I ever knew. You investigated me, calculated around me, but at the same time, you protected me when I had no idea. You wrote me into your reports, into your contracts, into every love letter. Alexander, I know all your flaws. But I've seen your sincerity too." She stopped in front of him and looked up. "So I'm not signing. Not because a penciled note is binding me. Because this is my choice. I choose to tie myself to a man full of flaws who loves me with his whole heart. For life." His eyes reddened. He reached up as if to touch her face, but his hand was shaking. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I'm not going to change. I'll still investigate you. I'll still try to control things. I'll still catch you every time you lie. Then you'll have to get used to me too," Emily said, taking his hand. "Get used to me barging into your study. Get used to me calling you out. Get used to me writing comments in the margins of your love letters like, 'Poor word choice here.'" He laughed, and then the tears fell. It was the third time he had cried in front of her, more openly than the first two, and somehow more real. Okay, he said. I'll get used to you. For life. 1 year later. Chen Building Materials had come back from the brink and was now Thompson Group's biggest supplier. Her father could walk with a cane again, and his greatest joy was going to Central Park to play chess and brag about his daughter and son-in-law to the other old men. His love letters had reached number 365. The latest one sat on her breakfast plate. Today's rhyme, Emily is lovely, Alexander truly loves thee. 1 whole year went by so fast, please guide me through the years that last. Not my best work, but the feeling is real. Happy anniversary. Meet me at the old place tonight. The old place was that private church in Westchester, the place where they had their fake wedding. He stood before the altar in a white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, just like he had years ago when giving speeches. This isn't a replacement wedding, he said. It's a replacement proposal. A real proposal. He took out a box. Inside was not a ring, but a key. In the town your mother always wanted to live in, I bought a house with a garden full of hydrangeas. The key is yours. Whenever you want to go, I'll go with you. Emily took the key, tears springing to her eyes. And this too, he said, taking out a notebook. My diary. Starting from September 10th, 2013. Every day, about you. She opened it. The first page read, tonight was the freshman welcome show. A girl cried after messing up her piano performance, so I gave her a piece of candy. Her eyes were so bright, like stars. I don't know her name. The last page was from yesterday. She smiled 7 times today, looked at me 3 times, and called me an idiot twice. I am an idiot for making her wait this long. But thankfully, we still have the rest of our lives. I can make it up to her little by little. Emily closed the diary and wrapped her arms around him. Alexander, she said, do you know what the key to a marriage before love story is? What? It's this, the one who marries first has to have loved earlier, hidden it deeper, and surrendered more completely, she said, quoting his own words. You did that. So did I. She rose onto her toes and kissed him. The church bells rang, and sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows like a blessing that had arrived at last. Outside, the hydrangeas were in full bloom. When he turned 70, Alexander was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. At first it was forgetfulness. He would suddenly stop in the middle of something, look around in confusion, and ask, where's Emily, even when she was sitting right beside him. She was 72 and still in fairly good health. She moved into a small apartment near his care facility so she could be with him every day. Each afternoon she brought a tin box full of his letters and read one aloud to him, starting from the earliest. Today the weather is beautiful, she read. I saw you in the library. You'd fallen asleep, and there was drool on your book. I wanted to wake you up, but I couldn't bear to. September 12, 2013. He sat in his wheelchair, staring out the window, his eyes distant and empty. But sometimes, when he heard a certain word, one of his fingers would twitch. Emily, he suddenly said. Who is Emily? She set the letter down and took his hand. It's me. I'm Emily. He turned to look at her. For a brief instant, a glimmer of light flickered in his clouded eyes. Emily, he said softly. My rose. Then he looked back out the window and forgot her again. But every afternoon, he repeated the same ritual. He would pull a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. It was worn nearly to shreds, and on it, in his shaky handwriting, were the words, if either party falls in love, the contract automatically converts to a lifetime agreement. He would point at the sentence and tell every nurse who passed by, look. I wrote that in the margin. It counts. The nurses never understood what he meant, but they always smiled and nodded. It counts, Mr. Thompson. It always counts. The last love letter she ever read to him was on a winter evening at sunset. It was the newest one. In truth, she had written it herself, copying his handwriting. The weather is bad today, gray and overcast. But as long as you're here, it's a good day. I don't remember much anymore, but I remember loving you. Alex suddenly, he turned his head and looked at her. His eyes were clear again, clear like they had been when he was 20. Emily, he said, the umbrella's fixed. It's in the study drawer. And then he was gone. Peacefully. With a smile still on his lips. She opened the study drawer. Inside was, in fact, an umbrella. Blue and white checkered. The frame had been repaired, the fabric clean and bright. Carved into one of the ribs were the words, 2026 forever. Alexander and Emily. Lifetime contract. She opened the umbrella and walked out of the care facility. Snow had begun to fall. The flakes landed softly on the umbrella like countless love letters arriving late. It counts, she whispered. It always counts. The world beneath an umbrella is very small, only large enough for two people. And yet it is also vast enough to hold 20 years of time, and a love that never fades. Later, someone asked Emily, was it worth it, spending your whole life caring for someone who forgot you? She smiled, reached into the tin box, and pulled out a yellowed sheet of paper. It was the first love letter he had ever written, at 17. He had never sent it. There was only one sentence on it. The cruelest thing I ever did was design an entire game of business to marry you. The bravest thing I ever did was spend 10 years making you willing to be deceived by me for the rest of your life. She said, he didn't forget me. He kept the best version of me in the cleanest, safest place in his heart. Outside the umbrella, the snow kept falling. Beneath it, the person left behind smiled. Hey, this is marriage is not the end. Every time I finish a story like this, I find myself wondering, what is marriage, really? Is it a contract? A calculation? A transaction? Or is it a lifelong secret crush? Alexander spent 10 years setting a trap to bring Emily into his world. But he spent the rest of his life proving that in the end, the only one truly caught by it was himself. Emily said he didn't forget her. He simply kept the best version of her in the cleanest place in his heart. Maybe that's the truth about marriage. It isn't the finish line. It's the starting point. It isn't an ending. It's a beginning. It isn't the final page of a fairy tale. It's the first line of real life. If you have a story too, if you've ever felt lost in a marriage, hit walls, shed tears, write to us. See you next episode. And remember, marriage is not the end. It's just another kind of beginning.